What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing what happened to Kayla Berg. Kayla Berg was born on August 29th, 1993 in Antigo, Wisconsin to parents James Spandbauer and Hope Spranger. When she was just a toddler, her parents decided to split up. They were never married, so there was no official divorce. They simply weren't together anymore, but they did remain friendly, just simply went their separate ways while still living in the same town as one another. Hope and James made it very easy on themselves and on their children. They didn't battle over custody or get into petty arguments and fights. They co-parented very, very well, and though the kids lived with their mom, they saw their father, who lived very close by, whenever they wanted to. Hope said, quote, "We had the every other weekend schedule, but if they wanted to go by Dad's, I was more than willing to let them go. The more time they could spend with him, I felt was the best thing," end quote. James was diagnosed with cancer around the time of the separation and had to move in with his parents because he needed help caring for himself. He could no longer live on his own. So Kayla and her brother had complete freedom of choice when it came to which parent they wanted to see and when. And they could come and go as they pleased from each parent's house without any issues. Kayla was described as, quote, "bubbly and optimistic," end quote, by family and friends, a sweet and down-to-earth person. She was, by all accounts, a typical teenage girl. Now let's talk just a little bit about Antigo, Wisconsin, where all of this went down and where Kayla was born and raised for most of her life. Antigo is only a little less than 7 square miles and has a population of less than 10,000 people. It's one of those sleepy rural towns where everyone knows everyone else and everyone knows everyone else's business too. It was seemingly a safe place to raise children as well, with lots of opportunities for outdoor activities such as camping, hiking, fishing, etc. If you liked the outdoors, there was never a lack of something to do. Kayla and her brother Jimmy were extremely close, and most likely due to how close they were in age, they got along well and even shared some of the same friends. Family and friends said that Kayla had a talent for controlling and contorting her body. She was always jumping, flipping, rolling around, and loved to play on the trampoline. She eventually enrolled in gymnastics, and it very quickly became a huge part of her whole life. She was extremely talented, and she ended up doing gymnastics throughout her whole life once she had discovered it. She had a passion for it, and she just felt like it was what she was meant to do. As far as academics, Kayla was for the most part a good student, and she achieved high grades in almost all of her classes. This all started to change, though, in 2009 during Kayla's sophomore year of high school. Her mother noticed that her grades started slipping and that she wasn't around much anymore, as she was spending weekends with friends more and more often than she usually used to. What Hope originally didn't know, though, was that while Kayla was spending more and more weekends away from her house with her friends, she wasn't staying with them in Antigo. They were traveling about 60 miles away to the much larger town of Wausau, Wisconsin. Wausau is much different than Antigo. It's much larger and with a much larger population to match. Kayla and her friends were traveling there to spend weekends partying with new friends and meeting new people. In an interview, one of Kayla's close friends admitted that to 15-year-old girls, this was exciting, and Wausau was considered the big city with much more opportunity for fun and freedom than the sleepy, tiny little town of Antigo where they all came from. Kayla's close friend Megan later stated that she was the one that introduced Kayla and their friend group to the party scene in Wausau. She said that her closest friends were in her hometown of Antigo, but she had another group of friends and acquaintances in Wausau and thought she could have the best of both worlds by introducing those two groups. They would get rides from their older friends, and at these parties there was always tons of alcohol and drug use, mainly pot, but other hard drugs were also readily available to anyone who wanted to have them. They would all tell their parents that each one was sleeping at the other's house. The police had to be called frequently to break these parties up, and yet somehow, despite that fact, Hope was completely unaware that her daughter was partying like this and that she was doing it in Wausau. It was at one of the Wausau parties that Kayla met her first real boyfriend, a 19-year-old alleged drug dealer named Miguel Herrero. He and his brother shared a house in Wausau, and this was the spot where all of those parties were most often thrown. Eventually, he would start picking Kayla up in Antigo and bringing her to spend the weekend with him at his and his brother's party house. This particular house becomes very important to the case later on, so kind of keep it in the back of your head for now. It was located at 1017 East Wausau Avenue. Hope later stated that while she wasn't aware of anything having to do with Kayla's older boyfriend or her traveling to Wausau, she could clearly see that her daughter's behavior was changing. Not only were her grades slipping, but her attitude in general was just overall different. She decided to sit her daughter down and have a talk with her about what was going on in her life and what was expected of her from her parents, as it seemed Kayla had gotten a bit off track at that point. In June of 2009, when Kayla's sophomore year had ended, that's when Hope decided to sit her down for this talk. That conversation ended with Kayla promising to do better and to work harder. It was also during this conversation that Hope told Kayla that she was having a hard time making ends meet and keeping and finding work there in Antigo, and that she was moving to stay with her sister, Kayla's aunt, in Texas, where she thought there would be more job opportunities for her. Kayla was seemingly devastated by this news, but Hope made it very clear that Kayla did not have to go with her and could stay in Antigo with her father at her grandparents' house. Hope later stated, quote, "I wasn't going to make her go. It was entirely up to her if she wanted to stay by her dad. I didn't want to pull her away from everything," end quote. Kayla made the decision to go with her mother to Texas and to try to make a fresh start. Her brother Jimmy, who had graduated high school that year, decided he was going to stay in Antigo, and he moved in with some friends there. Just to make a long story short, guys, Texas did not work out. There were no more jobs there than in Antigo, and more importantly, at least to Hope and Kayla, there was no gymnastics team in the new high school. Despite having a positive outlook and putting on a brave face for one another, both Hope and Kayla were from the very beginning of this journey homesick for Antigo. Even though they were warmly welcomed and made to feel very comfortable by Hope's family there in Texas, neither of the two were ever able to really relax there. It just wasn't home. In July of that year, they were also notified that Kayla's father, James, had taken a turn for the worse with his cancer diagnosis. The girls were only in Texas for a little less than 2 months when they headed back to Antigo. On Sunday, August 2nd, 2009, mother and daughter finally arrived back in their hometown. Kayla's happiness and excitement were palpable, according to Hope. She, quote, "just couldn't wait," end quote, to see all of her family and friends again. Because she had given up her apartment, thinking she was going to be moving permanently to Texas, Hope had nowhere to live when they got back and was going to be staying with friends while she worked to get her and Kayla their own place again. And Kayla was going to be living with her father at her grandparents' house. The situation was a little bit uncomfortable there, as there wasn't much room, and Kayla actually had to sleep on a cot in the hallway in the upstairs of the grandparents' home. She didn't have her own room or her own personal space, which is so important to any 15-year-old girl. Kayla never complained about the sleeping or living arrangements, though. That's the type of girl she was, and she was really just ecstatic to be home and back in Antigo with her friends and her dad. Kayla didn't spend many nights at her grandparents' house anyway, and she mostly just stayed with friends from night to night, hardly ever staying all night long with her father and grandparents. On August 9th, 2009, just 1 week after returning to Antigo, Kayla told her father that she was going to be spending the night at her friend Natasha's house. The next day, when Kayla, who did not have a cell phone, didn't return home or contact her father at all, he called Hope. Hope, in turn, called Natasha's mother, and essentially, the girls' lies were finally uncovered. The parents were extremely worried because no one had heard anything from the girls since the night before, and all involved realized that neither Natasha nor Kayla were at the others' houses, and they were essentially missing. Neither girl had checked in with their parents like they normally would have, and had they called their parents that night, they never would have been found out. This is when one of Kayla's other friends decided something could be seriously wrong, and she knew she had to say something and come clean, even if it meant snitching on her friends and essentially on herself too, because she was also telling her parents she was staying at Kayla or Natasha or someone else's house and going off to party in Antigo. This girl informed Hope about Wausau and the frequent trips made there by Kayla and her friend group to attend those parties. Hope and Natasha's mother decided to go to the police station and file a missing persons report for the two young ladies. As they were filling out the paperwork, they received a phone call that the two were located and had not traveled to Wausau at all, but had spent the night at an outdoor party right there in Antigo. Neither girl had found access to a cell phone and hadn't been able to call their parents to check in. So had they been able to just borrow someone's cell phone for 2 minutes each, they never would have been found out, right? And that's probably what they were thinking as they got in trouble for all of this. Hope was really pissed, and she decided to put her foot down and told Kayla that going to Wausau was not acceptable and that Kayla was not to do it anymore. She felt that 15 was too young to be traveling that far alone with no adults around and with no adults knowing where she was or who she was with. She told Kayla in no uncertain terms that she wasn't to ever do that again. According to Hope, Kayla apologized and promised to never do it again and to try harder to get things back on track for herself. She wanted to prove that she was mature and responsible and capable of taking care of herself. As part of turning over a new leaf, she agreed to stay in frequent contact with Hope and to keep her mother apprised of any and all plans from there on out until she regained that trust and proved herself again. She apparently agreed to all of this and also promised her mother that she would shape up and that the new school year was going to be different. Unfortunately, and keep in mind Kayla's young age and the influence our friends usually have on us at that stage in our lives, this promise didn't even last for 2 days. On Tuesday, August 11th, Kayla called Hope and informed her that she was going to be visiting Natasha and hanging out at her house all day. When they got to Natasha's house, Kayla's brother Jimmy was there hanging out with Natasha's brother and his best friend named Kevin Kilcheski. Kevin was 24 and a friend of Jimmy's and Kayla's, and he was also a friend of their family. Their family knew him very well. He had stayed the night at their house before and had been a friend of Jimmy and Kayla's for years. He had even eaten dinner at their house and was considered by the whole family as another family member, according to Kayla's mother and brother. Kayla stayed at the house when Natasha left for work because she wanted to spend some time with her brother and with Kevin. Kayla and Kevin chatted together for a little while and then made plans to hang out later on that night. Kayla's friends would later state that Kevin was a fixture in their friend group and was like a protective older brother to all of them, often giving them rides where they needed to go without any issues. He would even sometimes drive them to Wausau, and he never told their secrets either. Later on that night, the exact time is unfortunately unknown, Kayla went home and spent some time with her father. At around 8:45 p.m., Kevin called the house and spoke with Kayla and came and picked her up just a few minutes later. This would be the last time anyone in Kayla's family would ever see her. The last confirmed sighting of Kayla was that night, the night of August 11th, 2009, at around 9:30 p.m. Kayla's friend Beth, who worked at the local McDonald's, said Kayla came into the restaurant while Kevin waited in the car and that Kayla was her usual happy-go-lucky self and in great spirits. She later revealed to investigators that Kayla had told her the plan for the night was for her and Kevin to go smoke some pot and just drive around and hang out together. That wasn't anything unusual either. Kayla told Beth that she would call her when she got off of work that night and left. Beth never received that call, but she wasn't worried and just figured Kayla either forgot or fell asleep and that she would speak to her the next day as she normally would have. On Wednesday, August 12th, James woke up to find Kayla had not come home the night before as she said she was going to. Usually, this wouldn't have been given a second thought by her parents, but due to recent events and the agreements that she had made with her mother just a day and a half before, she knew that she was supposed to call and let either one or both of her parents know where she was at all times, especially when spending an entire night out of the house. James decided to call Kevin and ask him where Kayla was. Kevin told James that after hanging out for a little while, he dropped Kayla off at her friend's house late the night before. James was pretty annoyed at this point, again because of the recent events and promises made, but he definitely wasn't seeing any cause for concern or panic just yet. He just assumed that he would either hear from Kayla later on or eventually see her when she got home later that night. As the hours started to tick by, though, with no word from Kayla, James did start to get a little concerned, and he ended up calling Hope to see if maybe Kayla was over at her mom's place. However, nobody was home, so he had to leave a voicemail for Hope that night. On Thursday, August 13th, Hope returned James's phone call from the previous day, and that's when James told her that he still had not seen or heard from Kayla since she had left, now 2 nights before, with Kevin, and that Kevin said he had dropped Kayla off that night at a friend's house, and he hadn't seen or heard from her since either. Again, though, while Hope was definitely worried, she kept thinking about just a week earlier when she was about to report Kayla missing and found out it was a false alarm. Remember Natasha and the outdoor party? Hope pretty much took the same stance as James originally did, and though frustrated, just assumed that this would be like so many other times when Kayla would eventually get in touch or come home soon. The next day, however, her frustration was mounting and she was starting to become really concerned. Hope started calling all of Kayla's friends trying to track down her daughter. This is when Hope realized that nobody had seen or heard from Kayla since Beth had seen her at the McDonald's 3 nights earlier. The next day, on August 15th, Kayla's brother Jimmy informed Hope that he had, quote, heard from people, end quote, that Kayla was staying at a friend's house and gave Hope the number to call this friend. Hope tried for an entire day to get in touch with this friend, but did not get a hold of them until August 16th. This person told Hope that she had no idea where Kayla was either, that Kayla had not stayed there anytime recently, and that she hadn't seen or heard from Kayla in a while. It was on this day that Kevin finally got in touch with Hope through a text message, as she had been trying to contact him this entire time as well, for days at that point, and she had been getting no response from him. According to Hope, the message from Kevin was simply him reiterating exactly what he had already told James days earlier about dropping Kayla off at a friend's house and not seeing or hearing from her since. When asked for more details, like where he dropped her off, what time, and even what she was wearing, Kevin was less than helpful. He claimed he couldn't remember the answer to any of those questions. Hope then reached out to Kayla's now ex-boyfriend Miguel, but he told Hope the same thing. He hadn't seen or heard from Kayla since the Friday before she disappeared. On Monday, August 17th, 2009, 6 days after Kayla was last seen, Hope finally decided to go to the police station and file a missing persons report. The authorities didn't immediately feel that this was a dangerous or concerning situation due to Kayla's nomadic lifestyle and the recent report filed that ended up being a false alarm. This drives me insane. They're always like, oh, it's just a runaway. It's a teenage runaway. Yeah, but when you're under the age of 18, you're not allowed to just run away. So it should be important, right? You can't just be 14, 15 years old and be like, well, don't want to live at home anymore and take off and everything's all fine and dandy. But I always see it in these cases where the police are like, well, it's a runaway case, and then they don't do anything about it. No, if it's a runaway case and it's a minor, then you need to be out looking for that minor. That's not the way it works, though. Detective Sergeant Dooley later said, quote, Kayla was 15 years old when she went missing, a pretty typical 15-year-old at that point. She was reported as a runaway on the 17th of August, end quote. I don't believe she was reported as a runaway. I don't think Hope went in and said, my daughter ran away. She was reported as missing, and the police wrote the report as though she were a runaway. And I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but I just want to clarify, because she wasn't reported as a runaway. The police reported her that way, based on their own assumptions, no facts, assumptions. Investigators did try to find Kayla, even though the investigation is much different for a runaway than for a missing, endangered teenager. They started by interviewing friends and family. Information was given to the police about who Kayla spent most of her time with, her frequent trips to Wausau and her ex-boyfriend, etc. Her friend Natasha said that even if she was in Wausau or wherever she was, she would never go that long without at least contacting her or their other friends. The authorities eventually got around to interviewing Kevin, and he recounted to them the same exact thing as he had been telling everyone all along. That he had picked Kayla up, they had driven around, smoked some weed, and then at around 10:30 p.m., as per Kayla's request, he dropped her off at a friend's home in Wausau. According to Kevin, he didn't wait to see Kayla enter the home, but had pulled off and backed out of the driveway as soon as Kayla exited his vehicle. He said he couldn't give them the exact address of where he dropped her off either, because Kayla was giving him directions on how to get there and he couldn't remember. Eventually, it came out that Kevin allegedly said he left Kayla at the house where Miguel and his brothers threw all of their parties in Wausau on East Wausau Avenue. Remember I said it was going to come back? It's coming back here. There's a big problem with this, though, and that's that the house had since been condemned and boarded up, and neither Miguel nor his brothers nor anyone else lived there anymore. Even though she had been out of town for a couple of months, Kayla was aware not only that Miguel had moved, but she had also been to his new place in Wausau just the weekend before she disappeared completely, and therefore she would have had no reason to want to be dropped off at what she knew was a condemned building in which nobody lived anymore. If she had wanted to see Miguel, she was very aware of where his new house was and would have just gotten dropped off there. Natasha stated to authorities that while Miguel and Kayla had not officially gotten back together, she had spent a weekend there with him at his new place recently, and the two were definitely considering reconciling and getting back together again officially. This information is what made authorities suspicious enough to reconsider this being a case of Kayla just having run away. They now elevated the status of the case from runaway to endangered missing child. This happened on August 20th, just 3 days after Kayla was reported as missing and presumed to be a runaway by police. As both the authorities and Kayla's parents thought more and more about Kevin's story, they started growing more and more suspicious of the information he had provided. Hope said, quote, "My daughter was extremely afraid of the dark. She had nightmares about people taking her and doing bad things to her. So for her to get out at a vacant house that is completely dark with no one around, that's not my Kayla," end quote. Investigators also found it very odd that nobody knew about Kayla having plans to go and visit Wausau that night. She had seen her brother earlier in the night, had seen Beth at the McDonald's, and she had also at some point spoken to Natasha, and not a single one of them knew anything about her going there. Jimmy, her brother, said that had he known she was planning to get dropped off there, he never would have let her go in the first place. The next person the authorities wanted to interview was Kayla's ex-boyfriend, Miguel. They asked the Wausau police to go and make contact with him and to check his house to make sure that Kayla wasn't there and to check out his story about not seeing her since the weekend before she went missing. The Wausau police went to Miguel's house and searched it with his permission and found no evidence or indication that Kayla was or had been staying there. He again told the investigators that he hadn't seen or heard from Kayla since the weekend before she went missing, when she was there for a party he had thrown, and she stayed from Friday until Sunday when she went back home to Antigo. The police in Wausau then decided to go and check out Miguel's previous residence to see if there was any evidence that Kayla had been or was staying there for whatever reason, but upon checking out that house, they saw no signs of anyone entering the building, as it was all still very tightly boarded up. Finally, at this point, the local media picked up on and started covering the disappearance as Kayla's friends and family started getting together and putting up missing person flyers. Tips poured in, but none of them ever came to anything. So I just want to mention here that this case did have a lot of tips that came in that ended up not being anything to do with the case, and I left them all out because I feel like that's just a side quest we don't need to go on. I'm trying to do overviews and provide the basic facts of the case. There's a disappeared episode. I'm not sure what it is, but if you just look up Disappeared, the show, Kayla Berg, you'll find it if you want all of that additional information. So the authorities' two prime suspects at that point were Kevin and Miguel, but they didn't have enough to really do anything but a cursory investigation into those two men. There were quite a few reported sightings of Kayla, but none of them ended up ever being confirmed, with Hope reviewing all footage of the women in these alleged sightings. Eventually, with nowhere else to turn and leads and tips running dry, the authorities set their sights back on Miguel and Kevin, respectively. They went back and more thoroughly searched the abandoned house Miguel had previously lived in and where Kevin alleged he had dropped Kayla off on the night she disappeared. They found no evidence in or near the home that Kayla had ever been there, or anyone else for that matter, since it had been condemned and boarded up. They searched the surrounding woods with dogs and even the small lake in the woods with divers. No sign of Kayla ever turned up. At that point, the investigators began to really pick apart and look closer into Kevin and his timeline for the night Kayla went missing, as he was the last person known to have seen and been with her. They determined that from where Kevin lived with his parents, it was approximately an hour's drive from the abandoned house in Wausau to his parents' house. He had continuously stated that he had dropped Kayla off at around 10:30 p.m. that night. Kevin's mother was the only person who was able to alibi Kevin for after 10:30 that night, with her stating she had seen him in the home at around midnight. This only left a half hour between dropping Kayla off and arriving at his house. It was at this point that Kevin's family hired him a lawyer, and he stopped communicating with authorities completely, and he refused to cooperate any longer or any further with the investigation. The authorities were very frustrated with the situation, but they managed to arrest Kevin in late October of 2009 for child endangerment, not because of anything really to do with Kayla's disappearance, but because on the night Kayla went missing, he had admittedly been smoking pot with her, which was illegal at the time, and Kayla was a minor while Kevin was 24 years old. Eventually, though, those charges would be dropped and nothing more about Kayla's disappearance would be learned from Kevin. This seemed to be a way the authorities thought they could gain access to Kevin and maybe try to deal with him to get some more information about the last time he saw Kayla. After all, his attorney had cut off all contact and refused to allow him to speak to them, but it didn't work, obviously. However, something that did come out of this arrest was that the authorities were now able to have his Jeep forensically examined. They were doing the exact same investigation on Miguel's vehicle at the same time, although Miguel had given them his full cooperation and permission to do so, but nothing came out of either search. At this point, with no leads and no new evidence, instead of allowing the case to stall, the small Antigo Police Department decided to ask for assistance from the much larger police department in the neighboring town of Madison. They requested the assistance of a dog team. Madison PD sent over Officer Karen Corcoran and her cadaver dogs to assist in the investigation. Now keep in mind, guys, these dogs are very well trained, and they only note the scent of the decomposition of human beings, so not animals or anything like that. In December of 2009, Karen and her dogs went through and around 10 different vehicles, with her not knowing anything about the case or whose vehicles were whose, so as not to unconsciously lead the dogs in any one direction or the other. The dogs indicated on Kevin's Jeep only, but it just added to the frustration of the authorities, because this evidence only was not enough to do anything to move forward in the case. It should be noted that Miguel's vehicle was also in this 10-car lineup, and the dogs did not indicate anything in, near, or around Miguel's vehicle. Only Kevin Kilcheski's Jeep. The investigators subpoenaed cell phone records for Kevin, Miguel, and friends and family members who may have been in contact with them. Again, Kevin's phone records were the only one who had any kind of suspicious activity connected to them. Authorities saw that he had called Kayla right before going to pick her up, as he previously stated, but then all activity on his phone stopped until 2 p.m. the next day. So either his phone died, coincidentally, or he purposefully shut it off. However, after further review of his cell phone records, they saw that in the days before and after Kayla's disappearance, this had happened with Kevin's phone a few times, so they couldn't really state it as suspicious when it happened on that final night when he was with her. Regarding the search of Miguel's cell phone records, police were able to confirm that he was telling the truth about the last time he had spoken to Kayla. Miguel at that point hired a lawyer and stopped communicating and cooperating with investigators when they requested another meeting with him after reviewing his phone records. This is all just my theory, guys, but I think he was an alleged drug dealer, right? So I think he was worried about them. I think he had a second phone and they had found out about the second phone. I think he was worried about them finding out what he did to make a living. I don't believe Miguel had anything to do with the disappearance of Kayla Berg. I'm sure of it as I can be sure of things, but I do believe he was hiding a lot of other stuff from the cops that he really didn't want it getting to light, or coming to light. After a few more months of nothing going forward in the investigation, the police, not willing to let the case go cold, called in Detective Corcoran and her cadaver dogs again. This time, they very meticulously took the dogs searching through wooded areas in Antigo, doing an inch-by-inch search. 12 searches were conducted in the next several months, and the dogs did alert in 2 separate locations. It just so happened that both of these indications were in areas connected to one of the main suspects in this case. Surprise, surprise, the areas were connected to Kevin Kilcheski. The first hit was at a parcel of land owned by his parents, and the second time the dogs alerted, it was on the potato farm where Kevin worked. Obviously, this renewed the investigators' interest in Kevin. If you recall, the dogs also alerted on Kevin's Jeep. So that's 3 separate hits by specially trained and highly skilled cadaver dogs involving the last person known to, admittedly, have seen Kayla alive. Unfortunately, the dogs alerting in these areas connected to one of the main persons of interest wasn't enough to do anything to move forward in the case against Kevin and didn't help in any way in locating Kayla. Here's where the case just starts growing cold. In 2011, Kayla's father died of cancer, unfortunately never knowing what happened to his only daughter. Years later, in an effort to get the case moving forward again, the Antigo Police Department called in the FBI and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The FBI posted a $20,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of whoever was responsible for Kayla's disappearance. NCMEC produced and distributed age-progressed photos of Kayla, showing how she would look 2 years later. They continued and went until she was 22 years old, each year coming out with a new photo. The authorities investigated a few other leads, including human trafficking, but nothing ever came from any of them. Obviously, with nothing new ever coming out to this very day and no progress being made in Kayla's case, speculation as it does ran rampant, but nothing with any factual or evidentiary value has ever been found. There are still sightings of Kayla to this day, however, all of them have been investigated and none of them have actually been her. Now, let's discuss some theories. Could Kayla have actually had Kevin drop her off at the abandoned house in Warsaw after all? Was she involved in some type of secret, intimate relationship with someone from there other than Miguel who no one knew anything about? Could this person have done something to her? Keeping in line with the assumption that Kevin was telling the truth and he dropped Kayla off at the abandoned house in Warsaw as she requested, could it be that she was going to meet someone there and was attacked and harmed by someone who was squatting in the abandoned house? Kayla's friends and family feel that this is highly unlikely, since when the police investigated the house and surrounding areas on more than one occasion, they never found any evidence of a crime on or near the house itself. They actually never found any evidence that anyone had broken into the place, as the boards and locks and everything remained intact. Divers went into the nearby water source and cadaver dogs had searched the nearby wooded areas and came up with nothing. There's a theory here that I didn't write in that just kind of occurred to me as I sit here reviewing this case with you guys. It was well known in the friend group that Kevin would keep their secrets, right? And I was wondering for a minute if maybe he dropped her off somewhere else and he's just been keeping her secret for all these years. I don't think that's plausible considering the cadaver dog hits. Those dogs were trained to only alert at the scent of human decomposition. And also, you know, I think he did it, or did something with her, but I'm sure it's going to come up. Like, did he just keep her secret? Plus, she was 14. Or 15. She was 15 years old, and how could she have so thoroughly remained missing all of this time? But it was just something I wanted to bring up before someone else did in the comments. The second theory that some people believe is that for whatever reason, Kayla had planned, again in secret, to meet Miguel at this old house for whatever reason. They support this theory with the fact that right before Miguel stopped cooperating with investigators, they had discovered and reviewed records for an old cell phone of his and saw that there were 2 missed calls placed to the cell phone the night Kayla disappeared, both after midnight, and that Miguel had traveled a couple hours away. I don't know what the numbers are or what the connection to Kayla was here. It was never stated. People who believe in and support this theory claim that Miguel may have convinced Kayla to meet him there and drove with her somewhere where he either hurt her or sold her into sex trafficking, all the while using a second burner phone to the one he had originally allowed the police to go through. However, the police did investigate a human trafficking angle in this disappearance to no avail. I think because Miguel was an alleged drug dealer, as I said earlier, much older than Kayla, and had been hanging out with 15-year-old girls, throwing parties for them at his residence where booze and drugs were readily available, he just kind of seems like the perfect scapegoat to most people. I do not believe at all, not even an inch, that Miguel had anything to do with Kayla's disappearance, and there's absolutely no evidence at all to say that he had anything to do with it either. Which brings us to the third and final theory, Kevin Kilcheski. With him being the last person she was ever seen with, his refusal to cooperate from very early on in the investigation, his shadiness with giving details and recounting that last night with Kayla, and the 3 cadaver dog hits, in my opinion, that makes him the most likely and most probable suspects, and that's also in the minds of some people. You know, other people besides me, I mean. I wholeheartedly believe that today, as I sit here in June of 2024 recounting and discussing this case with you all, that Kevin Kilcheski is getting away with murder today. I have to say, allegedly, he's never been charged. The last reported information involving this case was in October of 2019 when authorities conducted another search near a national forest area in close proximity to where Kayla was last seen, but again to no avail. According to investigators, leads come in from time to time and every single one is followed up on and diligently followed through until the end. But there is no new information in this case. This is still considered an open and active investigation by authorities. Keep in mind that Kevin has never been charged in relation to Kayla's actual disappearance, and he actually hasn't ever been officially named a suspect in this case either. I don't understand how that works. I mean, I'm not a cop, so maybe I'm missing something. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me. Spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you aren't already. Make sure your notification bell is on and switched to all. Leave a positive comment. It really does help me with the algorithm. If you don't know what to comment, just leave an emoji, you know, whatever. It doesn't matter. Interaction is interaction. Please check out the description box for some important links, ways to donate to the channel, PayPal, Cash App, becoming a member, becoming a patron, my Amazon wish list gift link. Please remember I am on Rumble, I am on Twitter, as well as here on YouTube. So if y'all can go follow me on those social medias as well, if you're able to. If you have accounts over there, I wouldn't mind making one. If you can't, that's fine too. Also, links to all of my books on Amazon, Kindle, paperback, and Audible are in the description box. Please support me in that way. If you want an autographed copy of any of my books, it's GemmaJadeParanormal at gmail.com. GemmaJadeParanormal at gmail.com. Please email me first before making the purchase. For any other correspondence, to ask any questions, to suggest cases I might cover or things you want me to discuss. Seriously, guys, anything, just reach out through email, GemmaJadeParanormal at gmail.com. Also, the updated schedule for the channel, when the pre-recordeds come out, when the live streams come out, what live streams are on when and which night, all of that you can find in the description box. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, I got your back. I believe in you. You can do anything at all you put your mind to. Just manifest that shit. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time.